I never thought a backyard could cause this much chaos. It started with a single letter, a neatly folded piece of paper slipped under my door on a Tuesday morning. At first, I thought it was a notice for community maintenance or maybe a reminder about dues. But when I opened it, my hands started shaking. The letter said the HOA had voted to reclaim a portion of my property, my backyard, for community development purposes. They wanted to build a shared garden, apparently. Only problem, that backyard was the only piece of peace I had left in my life. After my wife Claire passed away 3 years ago, I stopped doing a lot of things. I stopped cooking the way I used to. I stopped celebrating holidays. But that small patch of green behind my house, the one Claire and I planted together, that was where I still felt her presence. Every corner had her touch. The old maple tree she loved to read under. The tiny wooden bench we built ourselves. And the roses she said made our backyard look alive. Now the HOA wanted to take it away. I went straight to the community office that afternoon. The manager, a thin, sharp-faced woman named Margaret, didn't even look up when I entered. "Mr. Collins," she said coldly, "we've already discussed this with the board. The backyard area in question technically falls under community land." I frowned. Community land? I've been maintaining that space for 15 years. Margaret adjusted her glasses, eyes glinting. "Maintenance doesn't equal ownership. The property maps are clear. You're using land that doesn't belong to you." That sentence felt like a slap. I walked home feeling something between confusion and rage. That backyard wasn't some random open lot. It was fenced, it was landscaped. I even had property lines drawn during my purchase. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I spent hours digging through old boxes in my attic, searching for my original property documents. Dust coated everything, but I finally found a manila envelope with the real estate logo on it. Inside were the old blueprints and a property map signed by the county inspector. I stared at it for hours under the dim light, the line clearly showing that the backyard, fence and all was within my boundary. The next morning, I went back to the HOA office with the documents. Margaret looked annoyed. "Mr. Collins, we've already reviewed the plans from the HOA's archive," she said. "Well then," I replied, "you've been looking at the wrong plans." I laid the papers on her desk. Her expression changed instantly. She scanned the document, then muttered something under her breath. "These look old," she said cautiously. "They're original," I replied, "signed and approved, you're welcome to verify." She sighed and leaned back. "Fine, we'll have our land surveyor check it, but until then, please refrain from making any modifications to the disputed area." That phrase, disputed area, burned in my ears. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. I ran outside barefoot. 3 men in reflective vests were cutting down the rose bushes near the fence. I shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" One of them pointed to a clipboard. "Work order from the HOA, Community Garden Project, sir." I stormed toward them, nearly tripping on the lawn. "Stop, this is private property," I yelled. The foreman shrugged, "Not according to this order." I snatched the clipboard, scanning it, signed by Margaret herself. I called the police. By the time an officer arrived, half the garden was gone. Officer Ramirez listened to both sides, then asked if I had proof of ownership. I showed him the documents. He nodded, then turned to the workers. "Until this is settled, you can't touch anything here." Margaret appeared a few minutes later, furious. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding," she said sweetly, though her voice trembled. He shook his head. "Then let the county resolve it. No one's cutting anything else down until we know who's right." I stood there, fists clenched, as Margaret glared at me. Her eyes said it all. She wasn't done. The next week, I received another letter. This one was colder, more official. The HOA accused me of illegal expansion and demanded I remove the fence within 7 days. If I refused, they would take appropriate legal action. I laughed bitterly. Appropriate legal action for defending my own yard. I decided it was time to bring in someone who actually knew the law. My neighbor Rick was an old friend and a retired attorney. When I showed him the documents and the HOA letters, he frowned deeply. "This is serious," he said, "but I think they made a mistake. Look here, your property line extends 5 feet beyond the fence, not less." I blinked. "So you're saying I own even more land than they think?" Rick nodded slowly. "If your documents are authentic and they look like they are, the HOA's map might be outdated or altered." "Altered," I repeated. Rick sighed. "I've seen it before. HOAs sometimes redraw internal maps to rezone areas for new projects, but unless it's approved by the county, it's not valid." The word altered echoed in my mind for days. Could Margaret have changed the maps? Could the HOA really manipulate boundaries that easily? I decided to find out. The next morning, I went to the county records office. The clerk, an older man with kind eyes, helped me dig through old files. After nearly an hour, he pulled out a yellowed folder labeled Lot 42, Evergreen Hills. That was my property. Inside, I found something shocking. The county's official boundary map with a stamp dated 15 years ago matched my documents exactly. But then I noticed another file tucked behind it, a newer version stamped just 2 years ago. The new version had different lines. My backyard area was missing. I asked the clerk where the updated map came from. He checked the request log. "Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association," he said. My stomach dropped. I asked, was the update approved by the county? He frowned. "Looks like it was submitted but never certified, so technically the change isn't official." That was it, the proof I needed. The HOA had tried to redraw property lines illegally. I took photos of everything and went straight to Rick's house. He looked over the evidence carefully. "Well, this is definitely fraud if they tried to enforce an uncertified map," he said. "But you'll need to be smart about this. Don't confront them directly yet." "Why not?" I asked. "Because if you show your hand too early, they'll cover their tracks. Let them make one more mistake." That night, I sat in the backyard under the old maple tree. The moonlight shimmered on the cut rose stems, and I felt tears sting my eyes. Claire would have known how to handle this with grace. But all I could think about was revenge, quiet, legal revenge. The kind that doesn't shout but wins. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Everyone in the community was invited. I hadn't attended a meeting in years, but this time I made sure to show up early. The room smelled of coffee and cheap air freshener. Margaret sat at the head table, flanked by the board members. She noticed me and smiled, that tight, rehearsed smile that hides contempt. "Mr. Collins," she said, "we appreciate you joining us tonight." I nodded silently and took a seat near the front. The meeting started with routine announcements, landscaping schedules, parking violations, and noise complaints. Then Margaret cleared her throat. "Lastly," she said, "we'll discuss the community garden expansion. As you all know, this project will beautify our shared space and increase property value. Unfortunately, one resident has refused to cooperate." All eyes turned toward me. I stayed calm. Margaret continued, "We've given Mr. Collins multiple notices regarding the illegal fence and encroachment on community property. The board will now vote on a resolution to remove it." A murmur filled the room. I stood up slowly. "Before you vote," I said, "I think it's important everyone sees the full truth." Margaret stiffened. "Mr. Collins, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it is," I interrupted. I pulled out a folder and placed copies of my property map and the county's official document on the table. "This," I said, "is the certified boundary of Lot 42, and this," I held up the newer, altered map, "is the fake one your HOA submitted without county approval." The room went silent. Margaret's face drained of color. "That's not true," she snapped. "We updated the map for community accuracy." Rick, who had come along for support, stood from the back. "As a former attorney, I can confirm updating without certification is illegal. You've been enforcing an invalid document." The crowd erupted in whispers. Margaret's hands trembled as she shuffled her papers. "This is absurd. We were only trying to improve the neighborhood," I said quietly, "by stealing from it." The tension was suffocating. Finally, one of the board members, a tall man named George, spoke. "Margaret, is what he's saying true?" She hesitated, then glared at me. "This meeting is over." She gathered her files and stormed out, heels clicking sharply on the floor. The board members looked lost, unsure of what to say. I walked out too, my heart pounding. Later that night, I found a note taped to my door. It wasn't official, just a piece of paper with words scrawled in red marker. You should have stayed quiet. No signature. No explanation. Just a threat. I stared at it for a long time before crumpling it in my fist. Maybe I should have felt afraid. But instead, I felt something stronger. Determination. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one in court. The next day, Rick helped me draft a formal complaint to the county's property office. We attached photos, copies of maps, and letters from the HOA. Within a week, an official investigator was assigned to the case. A week after that, county inspectors arrived to survey my property. Margaret stood outside watching, arms crossed, pretending to look calm. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The lead inspector told me, "If your documents check out, Mr. Collins, you've got nothing to worry about." That night, I sat again under the maple tree. For the first time in months, I felt hope. The stars looked brighter. The air smelled of cut grass. But just as I began to relax, I heard footsteps in the yard. Slow, heavy. I turned but saw nothing. Only the faint creak of the gate swinging open. Then closed again. The next morning when I went outside, my fence was slashed open. A hole big enough for someone to crawl through. And near the base of the tree, something lay in the dirt, a small, shiny metal tag. It was engraved with 3 letters, HOA. The morning sunlight fell across the torn fence like a scar. I stood there, staring at the small metal tag that glinted in the grass. Those 3 letters, HOA, were engraved deep, like someone wanted me to know exactly who did this. My first instinct was to call the police again, but something inside me stopped. I wanted to know how far they'd go, what they were really trying to hide. Rick came over as soon as I called him. He crouched near the hole in the fence, frowning. "This wasn't random vandalism," he said quietly. "Someone wanted to send a message." I handed him the tag. "They left this behind." Rick turned it over in his hand. "These are the same metal ID tags the HOA uses for their maintenance cruise equipment. Someone either dropped it or wanted you to find it." We both looked around the yard. The rose bushes were gone, the soil disturbed. Even the bench Claire and I built had muddy boot prints on it. I felt something in my chest twist, a sharp ache that wasn't just anger, it was grief. Rick placed a hand on my shoulder. "You need to install cameras," he said. "If they come back, we'll catch them." That afternoon, I drove into town and bought a set of security cameras. By evening, I had one facing the fence, another aimed at the gate, and a third near the tree. I didn't tell the HOA, I didn't tell anyone else in the neighborhood. I just waited. 2 nights later, the cameras caught something. At 2:43 a.m., a dark SUV pulled up near my driveway. 2 figures stepped out, hoods up, flashlights off. They moved along the fence, crouched, and started measuring something. One of them whispered, "We need to finish this before morning." Then faintly, I heard a name through the mic. It was Margaret. The next morning, I watched the footage 3 times, hardly believing what I saw. I downloaded it and saved copies to multiple drives. Then I called the county investigator, Officer Daniels, the one handling the boundary case. When he saw the footage, his face darkened. "This is intimidation," he said, "and possibly trespassing. I'll file an incident report." By noon, the sheriff's deputies were back in the neighborhood, questioning HOA staff. Margaret pretended to be shocked. She even said she'd look into the matter internally. But I could see it in her eyes, she wasn't scared yet. She still thought she was untouchable. Later that day, my phone rang. It was George, one of the board members. "Mr. Collins," he said hesitantly, "can we talk privately, not at the office?" I agreed, though part of me wondered if it was a trap. We met that evening at a small cafe outside the community. George looked nervous, constantly glancing at the door. He leaned forward and whispered, "You didn't hear this from me, but Margaret's been hiding things, financial things." I frowned. "What kind of things?" "Funds for projects that never existed," he said. "Community garden, road maintenance, even a park renovation that was canceled 2 years ago. The money's gone, but the expenses are still listed as completed." I felt a chill crawl up my neck. So this garden was fake. George nodded. It's her way of moving money without raising suspicion. She tried to expand HOA property lines to justify the budget. Your backyard was just the perfect excuse. I sat back speechless. The entire land dispute wasn't just about control, it was about money. And I had walked right into it. Why tell me this now? I asked. George sighed. Because she's planning to blame the board when this all blows up. I'm not going down with her. He handed me a small USB drive. Here, copies of the expense reports. You'll want to show these to the county. That night I barely slept. The more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. The fake map. The sudden garden project. The threats. It all pointed to one person, Margaret. But I needed undeniable proof. So the next morning I visited the HOA office again, pretending to want to resolve things peacefully. Margaret greeted me with that same fake smile. Mr. Collins, she said, I'm glad you've come to your senses. Let's discuss an arrangement. An arrangement? I asked. Yes, she said smoothly. If you agree to remove your fence voluntarily, we'll let you keep partial access to the garden area. You can still visit. I stared at her. You mean I can visit my own property? Her smile faltered slightly. You're being unreasonable. I leaned closer. Tell me something, Margaret. How much is this project really worth to you? Her eyes flickered. For the first time, I saw something crack behind her polished exterior. Fear. I don't know what you're insinuating, she said sharply. Oh, I think you do, I said softly, because I know about the expense reports, the missing funds, the fake updates. Her face drained of color. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, You don't know what you're talking about. I smiled faintly. Then you won't mind if the county auditor takes a look. I walked out before she could reply. Behind me, I heard the sound of papers rustling violently. By the next morning, everything escalated. Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers were shoved into mailboxes saying I was spreading false accusations and threatening the community's reputation. Half the neighborhood turned against me overnight. People I'd known for years suddenly stopped saying hello. Some even shouted things as I passed: troublemaker, liar, selfish old man. Rick told me to stay calm. Once the investigation wraps up, the truth will speak for itself, he said. But it was hard to stay calm when the place that once felt like home had turned into a battlefield. One night, I was sitting by the window when headlights flashed across my living room. A car slowed down in front of my house. Then a brick crashed through the window, shattering glass everywhere. I ducked instinctively. When I looked up, I saw a note tied around the brick. Stop digging or you'll regret it. This time, I called the police immediately. They took the note, the brick, everything. Officer Ramirez came again, the same one from before. He sighed. Someone really wants to scare you, Mr. Collins. We'll increase patrols. But deep down, I knew this wasn't random vandalism. This was desperation. A few days later, the county's final report arrived. I'll never forget that morning. The envelope was thick, sealed with the county's crest. I tore it open and read the first line aloud. After thorough review, the property located at Lot 42 remains under the full legal ownership of Mr. Henry Collins. I exhaled, relief washing through me. Then I read further. Additionally, the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association is found to have submitted falsified boundary documentation. An audit and legal review have been initiated. I laughed a dry, disbelieving laugh. After months of threats, vandalism, and lies, the truth had finally come out. I immediately called Rick and George. Rick congratulated me, but his voice was cautious. Don't relax yet, he said. People like Margaret don't go down quietly. George, on the other hand, sounded terrified. She's furious, he whispered. She knows someone leaked the reports. She's trying to find out who. That afternoon, I received another visitor, this time Officer Daniels himself. He stood at my door holding a folder. Mr. Collins, he said, the county's audit uncovered financial irregularities amounting to over $180,000 in misused funds. Margaret is now under investigation for fraud. I nodded slowly. So it's over. Daniels hesitated. Maybe not yet. She hasn't been arrested and someone broke into the HOA office last night. Files are missing. I felt my pulse quicken. What files? The financial ones, he said grimly. Someone's trying to erase evidence. That night, as rain poured outside, I sat in the dark living room, watching the security monitor. Every crack of thunder made me flinch. Then around midnight, I saw movement near the gate again. A single figure wearing a raincoat stepped into the yard. I zoomed in on the camera. Even in the rain, I recognized her posture, straight-backed, determined. It was Margaret. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff. By the time they arrived, she was gone, but the damage was. The shed behind the tree was broken open, papers scattered everywhere. She had tried to find something, maybe destroy more evidence. The officers searched but found nothing except a flashlight and a wet set of HOA keys. The next morning, Margaret's car was found abandoned 2 miles away. Inside were shredded documents and a half-packed suitcase. The county froze her accounts. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. The same people who had called me a liar now whispered apologies. But I didn't care about vindication. I just wanted peace. A week passed. The HOA board was temporarily dissolved, and George was placed as acting president. He assured everyone that new elections would happen soon and that the stolen funds would be recovered. For the first time in months, I felt safe again. Until that Friday night. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you uneasy. Then faintly I heard it again, footsteps by the fence. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. But the next morning, when I checked the cameras, I froze. The footage showed a figure standing near the fence around 3:12 a.m. Not moving. Just standing there, watching the house for almost 5 minutes. The raincoat hood covered their face, but the stance. It looked just like Margaret's. Except she was supposed to be gone. I sent the footage to Officer Daniels immediately. He told me they were still looking for her. She hadn't officially turned herself in. She might still be in the area, he warned. Be cautious. For the next few days, I barely left the house. Every night I double-checked the locks, the cameras, even the shed. The feeling of being watched never went away. Then one morning I found something new on my porch, a single envelope. No name, no address. Inside was a photo. It showed my backyard, the same view from under the maple tree. But in the corner of the picture, faint and shadowed, was a figure. Someone standing by the fence, watching. And written on the back in neat handwriting were 4 words. You took everything from me. The photo shook me to my core. I held it under the light, staring at the faint figure by the fence, the rain-soaked outline, the haunting stillness of it. It looked like Margaret, but something about the posture felt wrong. Too still, too lifeless. Rick arrived a few minutes later after I called him in a panic. He studied the photo quietly. This wasn't taken from the street, he said. Whoever took it was inside your yard. My stomach twisted. Inside. He nodded. See the angle? It's lower than the fence line. Someone stood right here, maybe near the tree. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was personal, intimate. Someone had been close enough to touch the bench, the soil, even the memory of Claire. Rick urged me to call Officer Daniels immediately, and within the hour, 2 patrol cars were in front of my house again. The officers took the photo, dusted the envelope for prints, and combed the yard for footprints. One of them returned with a discovery, a single muddy shoeprint near the maple tree. They measured it, photographed it, and collected a soil sample. Daniels promised to fast-track the results. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of leaves, even the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I started keeping a flashlight and a baseball bat by the bed. It felt ridiculous, but fear has a way of stripping dignity. Then 3 nights later, the cameras caught something again. At 1:17 a.m., a faint figure appeared near the same tree. But this time it wasn't moving. Just standing still as stone. The motion sensor light didn't trigger. No sound, no movement, just a presence. And then the feed went black. Static. I ran outside, heart pounding, bat in hand. But when I reached the yard, there was nothing, no one. The cameras were ripped clean from their mounts, wires hanging loose. The only thing left was a faint smell of wet earth and metal, like rust and rain. The next morning, Officer Daniels came again. He looked at the footage, at the missing cameras, and sighed heavily. Mr. Collins, whoever this is, they're escalating, he said. We'll put a patrol car on your street every night until we find them. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that would help. Because by now, it felt like whoever was doing this didn't fear getting caught, they wanted to be seen. That evening, Rick came by with grim news. They found Margaret's car keys near the old drainage ditch behind the HOA office, he said, but not her. Not her, I repeated. He shook his head. They think she's on the run, maybe hiding, maybe worse. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted justice, but another part, the tired, hollow part, just wanted this nightmare to stop. For weeks, the yard that once brought me peace now felt cursed. I avoided looking out the window at night. The wind through the maple leaves sounded like whispers. Every creak of the floorboards made me think someone was inside. Then one afternoon, George knocked on my door. He looked exhausted, his usually neat hair disheveled. "Henry," he said quietly, "I think you should see this." He handed me a small stack of papers, copies of old HOA emails. These were sent between Margaret and a contractor named Reed. He was supposed to handle the garden expansion. I skimmed through them quickly and froze at one line. "Ensure the property markers are replaced before the next inspection. We can't afford another complaint from Collins." George swallowed hard. "There's more. Reed's company went bankrupt 2 months ago. He's vanished too." My pulse quickened. "You think he's the one showing up at night?" George nodded slowly. "Margaret didn't act alone, Henry, and if he thinks you ruined his paydays." The realization hit like ice. I hadn't just exposed fraud, I'd crossed people who stood to lose money. A lot of money. That night I triple-locked every door. But around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint creaking sound the back gate. Then footsteps on the grass. I grabbed my flashlight, crept to the window and peered outside. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on something that froze my blood. There, standing near the maple tree again, was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by a hood. He was holding something, a crowbar. I yelled, "Hey!" He turned his head slowly toward the light, and for a brief second I saw his face. It was Margaret. It was someone else entirely, someone younger, with cold, lifeless eyes. Then he ran. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. But this time they found tire tracks near the curb and a discarded work badge. It read, "Evergreen Hills Maintenance Contractor, R. Reed." Officer Daniels clenched his jaw. "So he's real," he said. "We'll put out a warrant." But something didn't add up. If Reed was behind the intimidation, why had the letters and photos started after Margaret disappeared? And how had he gotten that old HOA tag? The only way he could have had that was if someone gave it to him, or if he was still working with someone. Over the next few days, I stayed alert. No more photos, no more late-night visitors. For the first time in weeks, I began to believe maybe it was over. Maybe Reed had fled, or maybe the police had scared him off. But peace didn't last long. 3 days later, Officer Daniels called me early in the morning. "Mr. Collins," he said, "we've located something near the wooded lot behind the HOA office. You might want to sit down." I froze. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Human remains." My voice cracked. "Margaret. We're running the DNA now, but there's no sign of Reed." I hung up and just sat there, staring at the floor. For a long time I couldn't move. Margaret had done horrible things, but no one deserved that end. And if Reed was still out there, he was desperate, dangerous, and unhinged. That night, I walked out to the maple tree again. It was quiet, windless, the air thick with tension. The ground beneath my feet felt uneven, softer than usual. I crouched down, shining the flashlight, and noticed something strange. A patch of dirt near the roots looked freshly dug, the soil darker than the rest. My heart raced. I reached for the shovel by the shed and began to dig carefully. A few inches down, I hit something hard, metal. I brushed away the dirt. It was a small lockbox. Rusty old but sealed tight. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and forced it open with a screwdriver. Inside were papers, soaked and wrinkled but still legible. HOA documents, financial statements, handwritten notes with Margaret's signature. And at the bottom, a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting it to be corrupted. But it opened. Dozens of files appeared: transaction lists, emails, scanned receipts. One folder was labeled Private R. Inside were photos. Not of money, not of properties, but of me. Photos of my house, my yard. Even my late wife Claire, taken years ago at community events. Margaret had been documenting me long before the land dispute ever began. And one of the notes read, "Reed will handle Collins if he doesn't comply." I felt my hands go cold. This wasn't just fraud, it was a setup. They had planned to force me off my land from the start. The garden project had been a cover for something darker. I immediately called Officer Daniels again, told him everything, and handed over the box. He arrived within 20 minutes. When he saw the files, he didn't hide his reaction. "This changes everything," he said. "Margaret wasn't the one doing the dirty work, Reed was, but she documented it all." Before leaving, he looked at me and said quietly, "You did the right thing, Mr. Collins, but be careful, he's still out there." That night I didn't sleep at all. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like footsteps. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Because if Reed really thought Margaret had betrayed him, then he'd come looking for the only person left connected to both of them. Me. Everything changed after the investigation results came out. The county's land department sent official surveyors to recheck the boundary lines. They brought heavy equipment, old records, and even a drone to scan the land. For the first time, everything was about to be revealed, the truth that had been buried under arrogance and assumptions. The HOA president, Mark, stood at his window that morning watching the men measure my yard. He looked nervous. His wife whispered something to him, but he didn't answer. Maybe deep down he already knew he was wrong, maybe he was afraid of what was coming. When the county officer called me over, I held my breath. "Mr. Collins," he said, "according to our records, the land behind your house up to that oak tree legally belongs to you. It was mistakenly labeled as HOA property due to a mapping error 20 years ago. You own every inch of that backyard." My heart started racing. After months of humiliation, after all those threatening letters and arguments, justice had finally spoken. But before I could even smile, Mark exploded. "That's impossible," he yelled, his voice shaking with panic. "That land is HOA maintained, we've mowed it for years." The officer didn't flinch. "Maintenance doesn't equal ownership," he said calmly. "And your records confirm that the HOA had no claim to this parcel. In fact," he looked at his clipboard, "Mr. Collins, the HOA has been using part of your land without permission for their fence and community path." Silence. Mark's face turned pale. The crowd of board members behind him whispered, confused and scared. The officer continued, "You could technically file for compensation. The HOA has been trespassing for at least 15 years. That single word, trespassing, hit the air like thunder. I turned to Mark. For months he'd treated me like a criminal, calling me selfish, stubborn, uncooperative, but now the truth had flipped everything. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe apologize, maybe threaten again, but nothing came out. He just walked away, red-faced, shoulders stiff. The officer patted my shoulder before leaving. "You've got full legal ownership. I suggest getting it refenced properly. We'll send the corrected deed this week." For the first time in months, I could breathe. I stood in the yard, staring at the grass, the trees, the fence. All of it was mine, not because I fought louder, but because I didn't give up when everyone tried to silence me. That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I heard knocking on my door. It was Sarah, the same HOA member who had avoided me before. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know Mark lied about the property lines. He told us it was verified, we just believed him." I nodded. "It's fine, I get it. People trust authority too easily." She hesitated. He's in trouble. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Apparently he's been hiding more than just land records." Her words sparked a chill in my chest. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer, she just shook her head. "You'll see soon enough." The next evening, I got a call from a local reporter. "Mr. Collins, would you be willing to comment on the HOA property dispute and the fraud allegations against their president?" Fraud allegations. I froze. The reporter continued, "Turns out the HOA's president may have been collecting maintenance fees for properties that don't even belong to the HOA. Yours was just the first one we found." The pieces started falling together. Mark had tried to seize my yard not just out of control but out of greed. He wanted to expand his HOA zone to collect more fees to look like he managed a bigger community. He'd forged boundaries, altered maps, and bullied homeowners into silence. And I had accidentally exposed it all. 2 days later, police cars lined the street. Mark was arrested outside his home, handcuffed as neighbors watched from their driveways. His wife cried quietly as the officers led him away. The same people who once supported him now whispered about his lies. The new HOA board called an emergency meeting. They offered me an apology in writing and in person. They promised to rebuild trust, refund wrongly collected fees, and even paid to move the fence off my property. I didn't feel victorious, I just felt relieved. Relieved that the truth had come out, but also sad it had to get that far. A week later, I stood in my backyard, the one they tried to take. The evening wind brushed against the new boundary stakes marking what was always mine. My daughter ran across the grass laughing while my wife brought out lemonade. "This place feels different now," she said. "Yeah," I replied softly, "because it's finally ours again." But as the sun set, I noticed something strange, a new marker at the far corner of the yard. It wasn't placed by me or the county, just a wooden stake with a red ribbon tied around it. My stomach sank. Someone had been here recently. And as I looked closer, I saw fresh footprints leading toward the woods behind the fence, large, heavy, and recent. It seemed the HOA chapter was over, but something else was just beginning.